The Real Frank Zappa book, sponsored by Ocean Spray, page 15. The boring basic stuff. Be regular and ordinary in your life so that you may be violent and original in your work. Gustav Flaubert. But how about the epigraph, huh? Peter, you're cracking me up already. Okay, here we go. My real name is Frank Vincent Zappa, not Francis. I'll explain it later. I was born on December 21st, 1940 in Baltimore, Maryland. When I popped out, I was all black, and they thought I was dead. I'm okay now. My ancestry is Sicilian, Greek, Arab, and French. My mother was French and Sicilian, and her dad was Italian from Naples. She was first generation. The Arab Greek side is from my dad. He was born in a Sicilian village called Partimentico and came over on one of the immigrant boats when I was a kid. He used to do work in his dad's barber shop on the Maryland waterfront for a penny a day or a penny a week. I can't remember. He would stand on a box and lather sailors' faces so Dad could come and shave them. Nice job. Eventually, he went to college at Chapel Hill in North Carolina and played guitar in some sort of strolling crooner trio. I still get birthday cards from the insurance company owned by Jack Waldrow, the banjo player. They used to go from dormitory window to dormitory window, serenading co-eds with songs like Little Red Wing. He was on the wrestling team, and when he graduated, he took a job teaching history at Loyola in Maryland. Both my parents used to speak Italian in the house, so the kids wouldn't know what they were talking about, which was probably money since we never seemed to have any. I guess it was convenient for them to have a, quote, secret code, end quote, but not teaching the kids the language. May we have something to do with their desire to assimilate. It was not fashionable to be of, quote, foreign extraction, end quote, in the U.S. during World War II. We used to live in the Army housing facility in Edgewood, Maryland. There was a family, the Knights, to whom my dad referred to as, quote, that hillbilly bunch over there, end quote. On one day, Archie Knight got into an argument with my dad, and the next thing I knew, Dad was running toward the house shouting, "Get the gun, Rosie! Get the gun!" That was the first time I knew that he had a gun, a chrome .38 pistol stuffed in a sock drawer. My mother was pleading with him not to shoot the guy. Fortunately, he had the good sense to listen to her. Because of that incident, I knew where the gun was. I took it out one day and remember thinking, this is the best looking cat pistol I've ever seen. So when nobody was looking, I used it to shoot single shot caps, and the blue dots I chopped off the end of some wooden kitchen matches. My parents were disturbed when they discovered that I had gummed up the firing pin. My mother's parents had a restaurant, also on the Maryland waterfront. She used to tell me a story about a guy who came in and started a fight. I believe it was my mother's dad who took one of those big forks they use for taking potatoes out of boiling water and stabbed the guy in the skull with it. He didn't die. Instead, he ran off with the fork sticking out of the top of his head like an antenna. My dad's dad seldom bathed. He liked to sit on the porch with wads of clothes on. He liked to drink wine and started off every day with 2 glasses of Bromo seltzer. My mother's mother didn't speak English, so she used to tell us stories in Italian, like the one about Mano Pelusa, the hairy hand. Mano Pelusa, vieni qua, she would say in a scary grandma voice that was supposed to be mean. Hairy hand, come here. Then she would run her fingers up my arm. This is what people used to do when there was no TV. My first memories of childhood include wearing a little sailor suit with a wooden whistle on a string around my neck, going to church all the time and kneeling down a lot. We lived in a boarding house one time when I was very little. I think it may have been in Atlantic City. The lady who owned the boarding house had a Pomeranian, and the Pomeranian used to eat grass and vomit things that looked like white meatballs. Later, we lived in one of those row houses on Park Heights Avenue in Maryland. We had wood floors heavily waxed with throw rugs on them. The tradition in those days was that you waxed everything until you could see your face in it. Remember, there was no TV, so people had the time to do stuff like that. And the other tradition was, when Dad came home from work, you ran to you ran to meet him at the door. Once, when Dad was coming home from work, my younger brother, Bobby, ran faster than I did. He arrived first at the door. It was a door with the little panes of glass in it. He opened it, hugged Dad, and then closed it. I came running and skidded on the throw rug, crashing my left arm through the glass. I heard them talking about how they should get a doctor to stitch it up. I complained so much that they didn't stitch it up, just stuck a bunch of Band-Aids. And I was wound up with a scar. I can't stand needles. I had horrible teeth, so my parents used to take me to an Italian dentist who had a quite unique piece of equipment, a cross between a chainsaw and a sewing machine. He'd stick the thing in my mouth and it would go vroom, vroom, vroom. No Novocaine. I learned to dread the sound of the word dentist. My parents felt that they had to go to an Italian dentist because they couldn't trust one of those, quote, white person, end quote, possibly related to someone of hillbilly dentists. So it was that I made the acquaintance of the nefarious Dr. Rocca. He would have been sensational as the evil monk in The Name of the Rose. My first space helmet. My dad was employed as a meteorologist at Edgewood Arsenal. They made poison gas there during World War II, so I guess it would have been the meteorologist's job to figure out which way the wind was blowing and when it was time to shoot stuff off. He used to bring equipment home from the lab for me to play with. Beakers, Florence flasks, little petri dishes full of mercury, blobs of mercury. I used to play with it all the time. The entire floor of my bedroom had this, quote, muck, end quote, on it, made out of mercury mixed with dust balls. One of the things I used to like to do was pour the mercury on the floor and hit it with a hammer, and it squirted all over the place. I lived in mercury. When DDT was first invented, my dad brought some home. There was a whole bag of it in the closet. I didn't eat it or anything, but he said that you could. It was supposed to be safe. It only killed bugs. Sicilian parents do stuff differently. If I had an earache, my parents would heat up some olive oil and pour it in my ear, which hurts like a motherfucker. But they didn't tell you it was supposed to make you feel better. When you were a kid, you just don't argue about it. I spent the first 5 or 6 years of my life with cotton hanging out of my ears, yellow from olive oil. Page 20. Along with my earaches and asthma, I had sinus trouble. There was some new treatment for this ailment being discussed in the neighborhood. It involved stuffing radium into your sinus cavities. Have you ever heard of this? My parents took me to yet another Italian doctor, and although I didn't know what they were going to do to me, it didn't sound like it was going to be too much fun. The doctor had a long wire thing, maybe a foot or more, and on the end was a pellet of radium. He stuffed it up my nose and into my sinus cavities on both sides. I should probably check to see if my handkerchief is glowing in the dark. One of the other wonder remedies that had just come out was sulfa. Winter was freezing cold in that house at 15 Dexter Street. The walls were so thin, it was like a cardboard house. We used to wear flannel trapdoor pajamas. In the mornings, to get warm, we stood by the coal stove in the kitchen. On one occasion, the trapdoor, my younger brother's pajamas, caught fire. My dad came running in and beat the fire with his bare hands. Both his hands and my brother's back were totally burned. The doctor put sulfa on them, and neither of them got scarred. My dad used to help pay the rent by volunteering for human testing of chemical, maybe even biological, warfare agents. These were called patch tests. The Army didn't tell you what it was they were putting on your skin, and you agreed not to scratch it or peek under the bandage, and they would pay you $10 per patch. Then they would take it off and after a couple of weeks. My dad used to come home with 3 or 4 of these things on his arms and different parts of his body every week. I don't know what the stuff was or what long-range health effects it might have had on him, or that any of the children that were born after the time that they did it. Here's the family gas masks. Daddy, Mommy, Frankie, Bobby. There were tanks of mustard gas within a mile where we lived. So everybody in this housing project had to have a gas mask in the house, one for each member of the family. Mustard gas explodes the vessels in your lungs, causing you to drown in your own blood. We had a rack at the end of the hall with a family's worth of masks on it. I used to wear mine out in the backyard all the time. It was my space helmet. One day I decided to find out how it worked, so I took a small can opener and opened the filter, thereby ruining it. In any event, I found out what was inside of it. Charcoal, paper filters, and different layers of crystals, including, I think, potassium permanganate. Before they would squirt mustard gas onto a battlefield, they had some other stuff called chlorofluorine, a dust that induced vomiting. They called it puke stuff. The dust would creep around the edges of the soldier's mask, causing him to vomit. If he didn't take his mask off, he could drown in his own spew, and if he did, to let the chunks out, the mustard gas would get him. I was always amazed that people got paid to figure out how to do this stuff. The second part of my childhood. Are you sure you want to know about this stuff? Takes place mostly in California when I was about 10 or 12. First, I'll tell you how we got there. I was so sick often in Maryland, Mom and Dad wanted to move. The first time I managed to escape from the state was when my dad took a job in Florida, another civil service position, this time in ballistics, something about shell trajectories. It was still World War II. My memories of Florida include 1. Opelika had a lot of mosquitoes, and if you let the bread out overnight, green hair would grow on it. 2. Every once in a while, we had to hide under the bed and turn on all the lights because somebody thought the Germans were coming. 3. My dad made margarine by squeezing a red dot sealed inside a plastic bag with white stuff in which you smushed up, caused the white stuff to turn yellow, giving the illusion of butter. 4. My brother got a boil on his butt, and my dad had to squeeze stuff out of it. Margarine training probably helped, and there was a lot of screaming. 5. I was told to watch out for alligators because they sometimes ate children. 6. Everything looked like it was in Technicolor compared to Baltimore. 7. I got to play outside a lot, climbing trees, which eventually led to a fungus on my elbow. 8. Except for that, my health improved, and I got about a foot taller. 9. My mother got homesick, and since I was taller, I figured it was okay to go back to Baltimore. 10. We went back to Baltimore, and I got sick again. Edgewood, Maryland was sort of out in the country. It had little woods and a creek with crawdads in it, just at the end of Dexter Street. I used to play down there with Leonard Allen. Even though I was sick all the time, Edgewood was sort of a fun. When we moved back to Maryland, we didn't go to Edgewood. We moved into a row house in the city, and I hated it. I don't think my folks lived it very much either. I don't think my folks liked it very much either, because the next thing I knew, they were talking about moving to California. My dad had gotten another offer to work at the Dungway Proving Ground in Utah, where they made nerve gas, but we got off lucky. He didn't take it. Instead, he took a position at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, teaching metallurgy. I had no idea what the fuck that meant. So, in the dead of winter, we set out for our Henry J., an extinct and severely uncomfortable small, cheap car manufactured then by Kaiser, via the southern route to California. The backseat of the Henry J. was a piece of plywood covered in about an inch of kapok and some stiff, tweedy upholstery material. I spent 2 exhilarating weeks on this ironing board from hell. My dad believed, as I'm sure everyone in the East Coast did, that California was all sunshine and warm weather. This led him to stop the car somewhere in the Carolinas and present to a somewhat amazed black family standing near the highway all our warm winter clothing, convinced as he was that we would never need any of that shit again. When we arrived in Monterey, a coastal town in Northern California, it was freezing cold and it rained and fogged all the time. Oops. Page 24. Chemistry in Northern California. Because of my dad's work, I switched from school to school fairly often. I didn't enjoy it, but then I didn't enjoy much of anything in those days. A weekend outing of that period occasionally meant piling into the Henry J. and driving towards Salinas, a place nearby where they grow lettuce, and following the trucks, waiting for some to fall off. When it did, my dad would stop the car, pick it up, brush away the asphalt chunks, toss it in the back seat with me, take it home, and boil it. I didn't enjoy being poor. It seemed like everything that I wanted to do that would be fun cost too much money, and when you're a kid and you can't do fun stuff, you're either going to be bored or dissatisfied or both. For instance, I would have loved to own a chemistry set. In those days, if you got the large size Gilbert chemistry set, the booklet that came with it would teach you how to make stuff like tear gas. By the time I was 6 years old, I knew how to make gunpowder. I knew what ingredients were, and I couldn't wait to get them all together and make some. I had all that chemical paraphernalia around the house, and I used to pretend to mix ingredients, dreaming of the day when one of my little concoctions would actually explode. Once I thought I had come up with the formula for a new poison gas when the liquid potion I was working on, based largely on Windex, came in contact with some zinc. My dad wanted to be an engineer. I think he was disappointed that I didn't have an aptitude for arithmetic and the rest of the stuff that was required. They get used to give kids in the 6th grade something called the Cooter Performance Test. You had to stick a pin in the page in the boxes you selected. The text was supposed to determine what you would be best suited for in terms of employment for the rest of your life. My test results indicated that my destiny was to become a secretary. I scored highest in, quote, clerical, end quote. My biggest problem throughout school was that the things that were trying to teach me tended not to be the kinds of things I was interested in. I grew up with poison gas and explosives, with the children of people who built these things for a living. Did I give a fuck about algebra? The stuff in the old garage. We moved from Monterey to Pacific Grove, a quiet town nearby. I spent my recreational hours building puppets and model planes and making homemade explosives from whatever ingredients I could find. One day a friend said, "See that garage across the street? It's been locked for years. I wonder what's inside of there." We burrowed under the sidewall. There was a pile of crates full of 50 caliber machine gun bullets. We stole a bunch, removed the bullet heads with pliers, and extracted the gunpowder, only it didn't look like gunpowder. It looked like little greenish black sequins. I think it was called ballistite. It was a member of the smokeless powder family, nitrocellulose. I'd never seen any of that before. We put it in a toilet paper tube and stuffed it into a mound of dirt in the middle of a vacant lot and lit it using GIMP for a fuse. That shiny flat plastic stuff you made keychains out of, holders out of in summer camp. When loosely packed, ballistite powders a shower of little yellowish orange fireballs. The other thing that turned out to be rewardingly explosive was powdered ping pong balls. We used to spend hours filling ping pong balls into dust with a rat tail file. I got the idea when I read about a guy who escaped out of jail by making a bomb out of playing cards. The article said the playing cards were coated with some type of cellulose material, and the convict had scraped it off and accumulated a plasticized dust. The casting for the bomb was a toilet paper roll wrapped with tar tape. He blew his way out of jail with it, so I thought, there's a clue in here somewhere. How I almost blew my nuts off. You used to be able to buy single-shot caps at a hobby store. Those were better than the ones on the little rolls because they had more powder in them and made a bigger bang. I spent hours with my X-Acto knife cutting away the extra paper, saving the trimmed edges in a jar. Along with this, I had another jar full of semi-lethal ping pong dust. One afternoon, I was sitting in the garage, an old rickety one with a dirt floor, like the place with the machine gun bullets. It was after the 4th of July, and the gutters in our neighborhood were littered with used firework tubes. I had collected a few and was in the process of reloading one of them with my own secret formula. I had propped it between my legs, filling it with a layer of this and a layer of that, packing each layer down with the butt end of a drumstick. But when I got the layer of single-shot caps, I must have pressed it too hard and the charge ignited. It blew a large crater in the dirt floor, blew the doors open, blew me back a few feet, balls first. Why, I could have almost escaped from jail with that one. The end of my scientific career. I continue to be interested in stuff that went boom in spite of that incident. A friend in San Diego around 1956 was also interested in explosives. We had been experimenting for about a month, finally collecting a quart mayonnaise jar full of stuff that was a combination of solid rocket fuel, 50% powdered zinc, 50% sulfur, and stink bomb powder. On open house night, we hitchhiked to school with the jar, borrowed some paper cups from the cafeteria, poured the powder into them, passed them out to our friends, and started little fires all over the school, which everybody's parents sat in the classrooms, recounting their offspring's daily schedules. The next day, I found my locker where I had stored the jar with my leftover formula wired shut. A short time later, in Miss Ivanikik's English class, I received an invitation to visit the dean's office so that I might be introduced to the fire marshal. They threw me out of school and were going to put me on probation, but my mother pleaded with the probation guy, who happened to be Italian, and explained that my dad was about to be transferred out of San Diego to Lancaster, and they let me go. This concluded phase one of my scientific career.